Welcome back to MedCity FemForward. I'm Marissa Plesha, reporter for MedCity News. In this episode, we're joined by Anna Jeter of AOA DX, a women's health biotech company. We discussed a report that Anna recently co authored that's focused on women's health exits and why women's health is a scalable sector. Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for joining MedCity FemForward.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I'm glad that we get a chance to chat.
Yes, of course. And, we want to talk about your women's health exits report. But before we get into that, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and AOA DX?
Yes, absolutely. So I am a co-founder and chief regulatory officer of AOA DX. And AOA is an early stage company where we are developing a diagnostic test, a blood test for early detection of ovarian cancer for those women who have signs and symptoms and are going to their provider.
Great. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned, you've recently released a report at the JP Morgan conference. It's called Follow the Exits: Why Women's Health is a Smart Bet in Healthcare. What were some of the key findings in this report? Why is women's health a smart bet in healthcare?
So some of the key findings in this report, and the reason we put this report together is because there is this misconception and perception that women's health is a niche and really emerging category. There have been quite a few reports. The first one was led by McKinsey that really talked about the $1 trillion women's health opportunity, that this is a future opportunity. There's so much potential there. And what we heard from investors is that they were waiting for something that can actually anchor the space, anchor the market to say, this is a real category that we can invest in and there's potential for returns there. And as somebody who has worked in women's health for the last 15 years, has been part of two successful women's health exits, myself and my co-founder, Oriana, who's the CEO, were talking and we said, what do you mean you're waiting for the first one? There's this one and this one and this one. And we could name multiple large multi-billion-dollar exits just off the top of our head because we have been in this space. And so the reason we put together this report is to show people that this is a proven and scaled healthcare market. Yes, it is an enormous future opportunity and it is already performing and has performed. There are over 27 unicorns in this space, and that there's already $100 billion in realized exit dollars that have been returned to investors. And to actually show that this isn't new, this isn't altruistic, that this is truly a profitable and important and strategic category. So you asked me about some of the top findings from the report. One of the top findings is that we've already seen over $100 billion in exits, and an exit means a transaction, either a merger and acquisition or an IPO, of money that's returned back to investors that they've invested into these companies. And that also means that there's a significant appetite and demand from acquirers, your large diagnostic or medical device companies, or also pharma, who are then taking these products and really ensuring wide dissemination to all of, throughout healthcare to all women. So it reaches every single person and provider. We also saw that it's accelerating. On nearly half of all the exits happen in the last 5 years, and we're seeing the trend really speed up to show that those companies that have been started over the last 5 to 10 years are now delivering those results and returns, kind of talking about that opportunity, that future opportunity that's already happening now. And it's only the matter of time of how much faster we're going to reach the next 100 billion, right? As compared to the first 100 billion. And some of the biggest ones is that there's already been 27 unicorns in this space. And when I went out to speak to colleagues in the space, as we're making this report, I would just ask, how many unicorns have been in women's health? And they would say none. We're waiting for that first one. Or somebody would sometimes give the benefit of the doubt and be like, probably one. And when I would say there's been 27, that was really eye-opening to them in terms of the size and scale of the market.
Yeah, some really interesting findings there. You mentioned there being 27 unicorns in the women's health space. Can you just call out some examples and why they've been so successful?
So, for example, Digene exited in 2006. that was HPV screening. SciTech also very similar. And I think that's when we were seeing the large screening programs really transition from pap smear to HPV. We've seen exits in breast cancer that are extremely important, right? Like Oncotype DX that are really looking at the different mutations, which are the right therapies that will generate much better results. We've also seen companies like Ventana, again, oncology, right? Oncology screening that are all focused on women's health. Just this year, we're talking this year, it's already 2026. In 2025, which felt very recent, in 2025, we had Hologic, right? Which is one of the biggest women's health companies that really focuses on oncology, on bone health, that was taken private by private equity, and that was $18 billion. Billion to One, which is neonatal testing, had an IPO of $4.4 billion. And so these are some really big mega exits that signal just how big this market is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving those examples.
Mhm.
Can you also walk us through your methodology for this report?
Yes, absolutely. So, what we wanted to ensure is that the report in our database is very credible, because at some point, you also, all women's healthcare becomes healthcare, right? And the way that we put together the database, number one, as part of the methodology, we defined how do we define women's health? And it's the categories, exclusively, disproportionately, and differently. And we went through PitchBook starting from the year 2000 to the year 2025. For those who aren't familiar with PitchBook, it's essentially a database that a lot of investors use that has all of like funding, investment information, if the company went on to exit, if the company is generating revenue. And we also looked through press releases of companies, of who they acquired. We went out to our friends and investors in the space to understand, okay, what other women's health exits have there been, in order to add to our database. And in our database, we had a total of 272 exits between the year 2000 and 2024, with an additional 4 highlighted exits in 2025.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. As you were conducting this, was there anything that really surprised you that you weren't expecting to see in this report?
That's interesting. What surprised us is, I don't know that we anticipated that we'll get to 100 billion. We went into this as a really, we didn't have any preconceived notions. We just wanted to look at the data, and we looked at it just completely across the board. Let's figure this out. One of the things that was surprising but fantastic in a really good way is what we saw is that diagnostics really anchor this field. And as a diagnostics company, that's obviously fantastic for us as well, but that's not the lens we went to look at it at all. That is just what emerged. And what we realized very quickly is that if you look at our healthcare and you look at our screening programs, for example, we have 3 large national screening programs. 2 out of 3 are for women, right? For cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer. Lung cancer is really trying to get in there now as well. And what we're seeing is lung cancer is on the rise in young women too. We saw the capital efficiency. There's a lot of discussion that women's health just gets 2%, right, of funding. And what became clear is what we can do with that 2%, so that if that number was to double, triple, or hopefully 100x, how much bigger the potential would be for those conditions that affect women exclusively, disproportionately, and differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were going through some of the recent exits, what struck me was that um, a lot of these were women's health companies that are outside of the maternal health space. And a lot of times I feel like women's health is really just equated as being maternal health. So,
Mhm.
when you looked at some of these exits, were there any particular areas within women's health that you felt like were really hot spots as you were conducting this?
Oncology. Oncology stood out in a very, very big way. And I think what you're saying as well is exactly what we wanted to show in the report. In many people's minds, women's health just has to do with reproductive organs. And so, for example, IVF is certainly front of women's health. And a lot of it has in the recent years started to refer to as like bikini medicine, right? Like anything that's below the bikini line. But truly, women are a whole person, and we experience certain condition different to than men do, right? And is for, especially if you look at autoimmune disease or cardiovascular, we now know that men and women respond differently, right? We respond differently to drugs, Alzheimer's. And what's really important is that we call that out, because there's tremendous opportunity in investing in those areas, investing in women's health in order to get much better results, right? Better results for the patients, and also much better results for the investors who are investing in those companies.
Yeah, so well said. And I know you presented these findings at JP Morgan. What has been the response that you've been getting from people as you've been telling them some of these findings?
The response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think people were excited and hungry for data that was presented in a new way. This is a completely different lens. There are many people who work on the topic of women's health, and everybody's work is important. And I think it contributes, to the overall pie. And a lot of it has been focused on the opportunity in the future trillion. And what we're seeing is, yes, the future trillion is important. And there's already been 100 billion. How do we make the next 100 billion? Right. And the response has been fantastic to actually see the data and to actually say, look at the data, look at all of the success that's already been had in women's health. And now we can translate this into our own pitches or discussions with investors, or for investors, discussions with their investors, right? Those limited partners that invest into them. And I think that's been really fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And due to this positive feedback, do you have any plans to conduct additional research in this area? And if so, what do you plan to focus that research on?
We have had so many ideas. There is so much interest to do follow on. And so right now we're definitely having discussions. It's something that we're interested in doing. There is some really fantastic companies and non-for-profits and kind of thought leaders that are interested to partner with us to answer new questions and different angles, because now we've built this database. And so we can interrogate that database asking different questions, right? As well, there's been questions asked about leadership of those companies as an example. And so right now what we're doing is we need to regroup, we need to collect all of the feedback that we've received, which has been fantastic, and then figure out what's the next thing that we want to tackle with the data that we already have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Anna, I just have one last question for you. Based on the findings of this report, what do you want people to take away, whether they're entrepreneurs, investors, providers, payers, et cetera?
What I want them to take away is that women's health isn't niche, and it's not simply an altruistic endeavor. Yes, it's very important that we address women's health because we're women, we know women, we have mothers, we have sisters, we have daughters, whatever it might be. And it's also a fantastic business opportunity. It's simply good business that has a very significant need, right? And there needs to be a supply. And so what I want them to really take away from this is there are huge returns on investment. Women's health tends to be really capital efficient. And there is a number of strategic buyers that are looking to fill their pipeline, to fill the need that's out there. And so that is my number one thing, is when you talk to investors and when investors talk to their limited partners and their investors, is to say, this is the area that needs more investment, because that's where we're going to generate the next $100 billion. This is going to be the next big exit for our fund.
Yeah, so well said. Well, Anna, this has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining MedCity FemForward and talking about this report.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.